All right, so welcome everyone to the weekly Velero community meeting. Today is Tuesday, February 18th. Thanks a lot for joining everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and share the agenda and we'll get started with some status updates. And just a reminder while I'm doing that, this will be posted on YouTube afterwards for public viewing. All right, so we'll jump into the status updates, and I'm up first here. I don't have much of an update. We had the 3-day holiday weekend in the US, and I was out for a day before that, so I've been away from the computer for a few days. I'm the point person for community support this week, so mostly gonna be spending my time over the next day or two just catching up with all the goings on in Slack and GitHub. And hopefully checking in on the PR that Nolan has around CRD backup and restore, which we'll get to more in a bit. So that's about it for me in this section. So I'll pass it off to Carlisia.
Hi, everyone. I'm not in my usual office today, so that's why I don't even have a camera going. So last week, I was focused on getting the CRDs split up. So what will actually be the output of the new CLI commands for installation. So I got different sets working with kustomize. And we had a meeting, and I'm trying to paste the link here, but it's not working. I'll paste it here later. And I'll also paste the link to the YouTube video that we recorded for that meeting on the issue, actually on the PR. I'm on a Windows machine right now. Anyway, the paste is right there, it's just not working. So that is how, so I got the CRDs cleaned up. They deploy fine with kustomize. And excuse me, my next thing is to get the deployment patched. So for example, if I have, if I do a Velero init, we'll install the server deployment. And then if later on I want to do, add a plugin, for example, that needs to patch the deployments. So right now, if I just run the plugin CRD, the CRD that would install the plugins, it will just overwrite the deployment that's there. So but kustomize has a feature to patch, and hopefully everything is going to work. So I need to test that. And I need to catch up with PRs because I sort of neglected PR reviews last Thursday and Friday. So I'll catch up with that today. And that's it for me.
All right, thanks, Carlisia. Anyone have any questions or comments on that? All right, well, we'll move on to Nolan in that case.
Yeah, yeah. So last week, we had talked in last week's community meeting about an issue with CRDs that were submitted to V1 Beta 1 endpoints getting automatically upgraded to V1 due to Velero using the preferred version. Excuse me. I've got a PR up with 2 proposals for getting those CRDs. There's 2 fixes. The quick summary of them is the first one, well, going in order that they are on the PR. The first one retains the version 1, but adds the missing fields that the API server complains about. It just adds the keys, but it doesn't populate them. So it adds the schema, the necessary schema fields, but doesn't actually build a schema for you. And then the second one changes the version field to V1 Beta 1, but keeps the extra fields that got added in the up conversion of the upgrade webhook. So as part of the upgrade to V1, Kubernetes adds some fields like the versions list, and that PR has like a diff of what comes out of the V1 API. It's still compatible with V1 Beta 1, So it won't be exactly what was submitted, but it will be restorable. So as far as my testing goes, both of those proposals work in terms of restoring, so that they both unblock the issue that Genting had reported. Mostly looking for feedback from the core team and others as to which one is preferable. So far, Genting and Steve have preferred the changing to V1 Beta 1 and not keeping the V1 version. So the rest of the week has been some internal stuff and working on reviewing the install work that carlisia has been working on. And then this week I hope to, hopefully we can get this fix in and get 1.3 released. And I would like to get back to working on the CSI testing with Ashish. And I think that's it.
Hey, Nolan, really quickly, can you elaborate a little bit on the CSI testing that you're doing with Ashish? What does that entail?
Ashish has been doing more of it, so I should probably have deferred to him, but really it's been making sure that the Velero CSI plugin that we have now works with the host path driver, since that's the only one that supports the V2 APIs for snapshotting currently. And then implementing our work stream. We have several issues that we need to get to beta level support because we know the current plugin is proof of concept level. So we need to, there's several fixes we need to make on it. I'm blanking on them now, but they're in GitHub and ZenHub. So just making sure it continues to work and that the upgrade to the new beta didn't introduce any flaws, and making sure we plug any logical consistencies that we knew, or inconsistencies that we knew existed as part of the POC.
Got it. Makes sense. Thank you.
Yep.
All right, any other questions or comments for Nolan? All right, yeah, if folks could weigh in on the PR that's linked there today, that'd be great, so that we can, I think we're probably gonna wanna ship a second beta, including this fix for 1.3. I think this is a big enough fix that it merits getting a second beta out for folks to test. So we can plan on doing that. And we had one or two other small fixes that have gone in since we released the first beta. So we'll get to push all those out in a beta and get a little bit of testing on it before we move on to the 1.3 release. All right, moving on to Ashish.
Yeah, so for me, I was making progress on the CSI plugin for Velero. I have an environment that I can set up with like no problems using kind and the necessary CSI driver controllers and all the necessary parts in the right order. I have verified that the CSI workflow kind of works. Now I'm just kind of going back and reading up on Nolan's initial design that he had. The backup workflow kind of makes sense. I have a few questions around some of the field names, but everything was pretty straightforward. So I'm probably going to be able to get that into a PR sometime today or tomorrow, and then start working on the restore workflow. So that's the idea, at least for me. The other stuff is I have a PR to switch to Go modules. I didn't see before I kind of made progress on this. There was another PR to do the same thing, but there was some areas where the earlier PR did not address. That was around like making sure your Go module files are up to date and stuff. Like if you are making a change and then you introduce a change to the Go mod and Go sum, and you forget to check it in, that will kind of break the build for other people who don't have that same updated Go module files. So that way, I also have that verification built into the CI. So if folks want to take a look and comment, that'd be great. Also, over the weekend, I saw some folks reporting issues with using the beta release of Velero, using the Velero, using the AWS plugin because of the no group, nobody change. So I think we need to cut a release of our plugins as well to work with the beta release.
So yeah, just on that last thing, I think we can definitely cut a release of those. I think that issue is isolated to a specific environment. It's not a general issue. It works.
Yeah.
They work fine on AWS, Azure, GCP, but there's no harm in cutting a release to fix it for that specific environment.
Yeah, the workaround is to use the master image, but yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So for folks on support, if this comes up, I think we can just point them to the latest release.
And Ashish, remind me on the status of our CSI snapshot plugins. Have we updated those to the V1 Beta 1 API?
Yes, those have been updated to use the V1 Beta 1 APIs, but it is super experimental. There are a lot of some things. It kind of works in certain flows. It doesn't work always, and also it doesn't back up the backups don't generate the volume snapshot class and the other volume snapshot objects that we also want to back up, which are essential for the validity of the backup and also for the backup and restore to work.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, and can't reiterate enough that what's out there currently is a prototype. It's not expected to completely work. So that's why we're going to be spending 1.4 actually sort of implementing the functionality. I just wanted to understand if I could go set up a kind cluster with the host path CSI driver and actually use those prototype plugins to trigger a snapshot. So it sounds like the answer to that is yes.
Yes. And I also have a gist with the setup that you need to do to set up CSI. So I think I've shared that before, but I can share it again. Let me know if you need it.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'd definitely, I'd like to make sure that kind of as you and Nolan are working on the CSI stuff that I'm, kind of going along for the ride. So I'd like to be able to have an environment set up and get these things installed and be helping out with testing, et cetera. So.
Yeah, we should definitely document as we go, even if it's not the final docs. I think our documents should be living documents and they reflect the current state of where we're at. Just so people can kind of, like you say, play along.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. All right, are there any other questions or comments for Ashish? All right, then we'll move on to the open discussion topics here in the agenda. First one, just wanted to give a quick update on 1.3, and we've basically covered this already. So we had this additional issue reported around the CRD backup and restores related to versioning. And Nolan has the PR up with the 2 different approaches. So I think we just need to make a final decision on which approach we're going to go with here and get that implemented and tested and merged. And then, as I mentioned, I think we're going to need to release a second beta, which hopefully we can get out this week. Let that sit for a little while for folks to test. And assuming that we don't find any further issues, I would hope that we'd be able to release the 1.3 release roughly a week after that beta comes out. So, I think the current timeline probably looks like the 1.3 release coming out next week, probably the second half of next week, and hopefully with the beta in the next day or two, the second beta. All right, I'll pass it off to Michael for a couple of items.
Yeah, sure. As you guys know, I'm only able to attend the first half an hour of this call. So I know that last week let me start on the last item, the custom CS support from Dylan and the Red Hat team. I know the ticket is there, and Nolan and Steve and others have started commenting on that. Is there an update on basically setting on what the design will look like before the implementation starts, or are you guys still something that you're noodling over?
So yeah, I just took a look at this at the end of last week, and I've basically been out since I commented on it, so I haven't even gotten a chance to read through Dylan's responses.
Okay.
So I will definitely circle back on this one in the first part of this week. I think the general direction was pretty clear, but there were some details to sort out. So hopefully we can get to a resolution on those pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you.
And certainly if anyone else is interested in this or has thoughts on the design, feel free to add comments in that PR.
Sounds good. And then the second issue, and I sent an email on that late last night, is around this issue of what happens when Velero needs to basically restore into a situation where a namespace already exists. We've heard that from a few folks in the community already, that this is problematic for some of their scenarios for different reasons. So I see this kind of as not one issue, but like three different issues. The first issue is what happens when you find a pod that already exists, but you also need to restore it, and what do you do there is Velero. The second issue is you restore into a namespace, and that namespace already had artifacts and items that you're not restoring, but you're also not touching. And then the third on is, what's our best practice? Is it go ahead and delete the namespace, which is I think something that Nolan recommended, delete the namespace and then use Velero to restore, at which point we're going to always start with a clean slate and give you back the exact state at time of backup. So, all of those things are super important, and I see that there's a need for all of these at different customers. My viewpoint is, and that's something that we should discuss and obviously see if everyone agrees, is that we should do a couple of things. The first one is put a new flag in Velero so that when you're restoring, if the pod already exists or an artifact already exists, it allows us as Velero to override it rather than don't touch it, which is what we do today. I think from a functionality standpoint, that's something that other backup tools I've seen over the years do, and some of them actually even do that silently. But I think we'll offer the operator of Velero the opportunity to make a decision on what does he want to do. Does he want to stay with a consistent system based on the time of backup, or a mixed system where you have some items from before restore and some items after restore, which in my opinion might be a little bit more dangerous. So that was number one recommendation. And the second one is, when we restore into a namespace that already exists, items that we haven't touched and items that already pre-existed, potentially speed out a YAML script that someone can execute to delete those. We don't delete them automatically as Velero. That's not the responsibility we take, but we can actually identify all the items that Velero did not touch in that namespace. If someone wanted to clean it up, they could do that on their own by executing that script. And I think Nolan kind of recommended something similar. It might actually be exactly the same in one of his emails. I want to open it up for discussion, see what others think. And we don't have to decide now, by the way.
So I think the facility for doing that exists. So thinking about the restore code, we definitely log something when we see, hey, we tried to restore this. So I guess let me back up. There's a couple different cases. We try to restore something and it's already there. So we can recognize that. What we don't what Velero currently doesn't really have any way of knowing about is when something is already in the cluster but not in the backup, because we don't do we don't query Kubernetes at this point. So
Got it. Okay.
So the only way we currently get information is we take it's recorded as JSON, but it could be YAML or whatever. We take a document out of the backup, give it to Kubernetes API server, and it'll say, "Hey, it's already there." And so we record that in the log. We don't say, "Hey, what's everything in the namespace? What's everything in the server?" We could.
No, if we don't do that, that's not something we should do. They could do that. I mean, there are ways to actually dump all the objects in the namespace ahead of time. So that makes sense. So that was the second part of the question, right? So that makes sense, and we can tell that to users and customers. The first part of it, though, around being able to override an existing object.
Right. We could use a flag that we get passed down where if you specified this flag, which I think is kind of like a variation on this, where we say instead of just logging it, we say when you get a thing saying it exists already, instead of just logging it, delete it and then recreate it. I think that's probably more realistic. I don't know exactly what that flow would look like, though. And there's also the issue of finalizers and cascading deletes that may get tricky.
Yeah, it is possible that we could be stuck in the finalizer.
Yeah, we'll need to think about, with deletions, what does it mean as far as dependent items? So for example, if you're trying to restore a PV and it already exists in the cluster, and you try to delete that PV, it'll probably be deleted by the object in use protection, which means, we can't actually delete the PV without first deleting the pod that's using it and then the PVC. And so, that scenario gets complicated quickly. So we definitely need to have kind of a general strategy for how to deal with those kind of chains of dependent items in this scenario.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I've kind of always said that in concept, I think this feature request makes sense. I would like to have this feature. I just, want to make sure we take the time to think through the kinds of nuances of these scenarios. It also, it's relatively straightforward when you're talking about the backup or restore of either a single namespace or the whole cluster. But when you start mixing in label selectors and excluded resources and custom resources and various things like this that Velero allows you to filter on, it gets much more complicated to know kind of what needs to be cleaned up. So we'd also just need to think through that and make sure that, whatever we're designing works for all kind of variations of the backup and restore API.
Got it.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
No, go ahead, Ashish. I was going to say, I'm leaving in 3 minutes, so sorry, I'm leaving in 3 minutes, so be aware of that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that if we are going to have a flag, I think it makes sense to have a flag enabled from the client and get that flag passed through to the server to allow to do this on a per request basis. Instead of one general mode of operation that the program is started in. So I think for that we will probably have to change the backup spec to allow flags to be passed through from the client CLI backup create to the server, which actually runs the backup.
Got it.
Yeah, I agree that, this should be something that you can change the behavior of on a per request basis. I would think it would be new API fields probably on the restore object. So yeah. we would set those fields just like we do any other fields. Basically flags that you specify through Velero restore create just correspond to fields on the restore custom resource.
Yep, I agree.
The other thing is, I'm not 100% sure. Does Velero have a what if option for restores?
We do not. We have an issue in the backlog, but we don't have it implemented.
I wasn't sure. So a what if would have helped here, right? Because you can run what if, it will identify the items that potentially would trigger an exception or a problem in the backup, and then give them the option to clean them up. And at that point, you could walk the dependency tree, because you would tell them explicitly, we're going to go ahead and delete this pod, this class, this persistent volume, because they're included in the restore. Okay. Maybe we could pair the two issues at some point down the line. Cool. All right, well, I'm going to take off. Thank you all, and we'll see you all later.
See you later, Michael. All right, did anyone else have any other comments on those items?
Hi, Ashish, this is Yun Chen. I'm still a little bit configured. Do not understand what that means on your Node.js switch from nobody to nobody, no group. Could you clarify it one more time?
Yeah, so, okay, I'm unmuted. So in certain flavors of Linux, the group nobody does not exist, and because of which Velero fails to start. So for that reason, we updated the user as which the program runs to nobody belonging to no group in the Velero image when we build the Velero image. And that's, does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Previously, you didn't mention about the Linux on here, so I don't know why.
Yeah. Sorry,
yeah.
that was in my head and I forgot.
Right now, that's fine. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, well, that concludes the items under the discussion topics. I'll pause again to see if anyone has any other general items or questions they want to bring up before we wrap up here. All right, well, with that, our agenda is finished. So I think we'll wrap up today. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining, and we'll get a recording of this meeting posted on YouTube in the next day or two.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.